Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the fourth episode of Empower Her, a Women's History Month learning series. This week, we are doing Empowerment in Action, Advancing Women's Leadership and Influence. I'm your host, Janella Bella, CEO of Diverse Solution Strategy Firm. And today we have Saleha Khan and Amanda Furtado joining us as human resources experts, people who I've loved to watch kind of navigate different spaces. And I'm very excited to see how they share their insights with us today. I want to thank the Job Shop and West Women's Enterprise Skills Training of Windsor for supporting us and partnering with us in this program and giving us the opportunity to share this education outward. And so today we are going to just jump right in. So, something we've talked about a lot over this four episode series is understanding the space that is created for women and everyone in the workplace. So, we've talked about recruitment and retention. We talked about the workplace environment, and now we're talking about advancing women and looking at how they can be an integral part of a workplace. But to do so, you need to address workplace dynamics more critically to see what's that push and pull look like for anyone in the workplace. So, three pieces I want to talk about are the challenges in the workplace, strategies, and worth. What does worth look like for women and every marginalized demographic? So, when we talk about the challenges that are faced in the workplace, looking at biases that can limit the visibility of women and affect their trajectories. So, a lot of times when we look at biases and how people are overlooked or they're undermined, in a space, it can create a challenge for them, an added barrier that's going to reduce their ability to move forward. And it can be little things like being undermined in a meeting where they're continually talked over, or it can be that they're not asked for their input for information. Maybe they're on a team where it's majority male and they aren't given the opportunity to contribute. It creates a space where women aren't given that platform, that highlight, or that spotlight to contribute, and over time, that affects the psychological safety and it does affect their trajectory in the workplace. As well, perceived confidence and credibility affects opportunity. And there's a very important word there that I want to draw your attention to, and that word is perceived. Because a lot of people will say women have opportunities, women are given special support groups, or they're given the opportunity to contribute or feedback, whatever it may be, that a initiative that is supporting women in a workplace. But the perceived confidence and the perceived credibility is very different. And this again comes from that space of psychological safety. If someone doesn't think that they have the confidence, they shouldn't have the confidence in a space, or they feel like they don't have the credibility that maybe other people perceive them to have, then it becomes difficult for them to move forward in that trajectory. And that's a lot tied to self efficacy, self worth, and self esteem, which is tied to psychological safety and that dynamic in a workspace. Now, looking at strategies, when we talk about strategies to increase the positive culture in a workplace, we're looking at advocating for ourselves, showcasing achievements, and articulating the aspirations and negotiating resources. That's a lot. Ultimately, what we're doing is we're giving ourselves the opportunity to be highlighted and spotlighted by talking about what we're doing, identifying what we're doing and saying, this is my contribution, this is what I've done, and giving ourselves that pat on the back that we may not be getting from other people, because that's an opportunity to say, hey, I'm contributing, I matter, I'm valuable here. As well, when we're doing it for others, we're giving that opportunity to say, you matter here. And we're doing it kind of tandem together. So we're creating that innovation and that support. This is also important for allies and sponsors to get support and give support back and forth. It's not a one-way path. It's two-way. When we talk about increasing workplace dynamics, it's not just about women. It's about every single person, because when a culture develops, it affects everyone's well-being and everyone's relationships in the workplace, which ultimately affects the problem solving, decision making, innovation, and the success of that organization. The last one we're talking about there is worth. And worth is something that sometimes we take on as an individual, what we think our worth is, or how we treat ourselves, what we consider our quality to be. And in reality, our worth is responsive to the environment that we're in, because it's how we are given feedback or how we are told that we are great or not great. And so we need that validation, that acknowledgement that what we're doing is effective. So, looking for authentic relationships to create trust and collaboration, looking for people that can tell you you're doing amazing, be those cheerleaders for you, and celebrate you. In addition to do that for other people, celebrate them, make sure you give attention to them, and draw attention to the successes that you have. Emotional intelligence is a big part of this because it helps leaders become more effective and it also improves team outcomes. When you have emotional intelligence, you're aware of yourself, you can manage yourself, but then you're also aware of others and you can support that relationship development. Ultimately, here, what we're talking about when we go to consider workplace dynamics is how are we making people feel? How do we understand how they're feeling? And then how do we respond to that? What I want you to think about as an employer is what practices or policies does your organization have in place to address biases and ensure women leaders are visible and recognized for their contributions? And this is a multi part question because you can have policies and practices, but then do they address biases? And then do they ensure women leaders are visible and recognized? And then how do you be accountable to that? Because you can have expectations, but are they being met? Who's upholding them? How are you revising it to maintain this? And what is the cyclical effect of that? Are you doing this over a period of time? Is it iterative? Or are you just doing, we have a policy and a practice in place. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. They're very different things. And then as an employee and a candidate, what I want you to consider is what's one area where you could advocate for yourself more effectively and what support would help you do so. And this is something that we don't do enough as women, as individuals of marginalized groups, and generally as human beings, where we don't question how we can be our biggest cheerleader. So I want you to consider how you can advocate for yourself. What area do you need to advocate for? Is it that you need someone to send you meeting notes ahead of time so that you understand and have time to process? Is it that you need a little extra time to complete something? Is it that you want to advocate for yourself to take more self care time? Is it you need to advocate against yourself? What do you need to be more effective? And then the other piece of that is what supports will help you do so. And this is very critical. Who is going to help you? What can help you? Where can you go for help? Because we often can say, I need this, but you don't know where to get it from. And that means that we're not going to achieve that goal. So, in addition to identifying what you need, it's important to identify how you can get it so that you can create a goal, you can create a path or an action plan, and then you can work towards that goal and say, I've achieved it or I haven't achieved it. I need more support here. It's a process that helps you succeed more effectively. Another conversation that we've had previously is looking at mentorship and sponsorship. When we talk about mentorship and sponsorship, we're talking about relationships that are intentional within a workplace that create opportunity for people who need that extra support, who are taking that added kind of connection and moving forward with it. The difference between mentorship and sponsorship is a mentor is supporting that individual's growth and a sponsor is bringing that person forward. So when we look at mentorship, we're looking at guidance, feedback, and advice. We're developing that individual, they're developing alongside the support you're giving or the support you're receiving if you're the mentee. It's about refining your skills and support while navigating various challenges. Similarly, a sponsor is going to bring you forward, but they're going to bring you forward in the workplace, whether it's advocating for a new job or bringing you onto a new project and giving you the opportunity to go into that space that you haven't had the opportunity to go. What I'd like you to consider when you look at mentorship and sponsorship, if you're seeking that, how are you actively asking someone to mentor you or to sponsor you? How are you creating relationships to access people who can mentorship and sponsorship and create mentorship and sponsorship for you? And then if you're on the other side of it, if you can be a mentor or a sponsor, how are you showing people? Because if you're on the side of being a mentee, you may know that it's very difficult to ask someone to take their time to help develop you or to use their word to sponsor you. And so if you're in a position to mentor and sponsor, the same thing is people may be hesitant to ask or to reach out. So how can you show that you're willing to support people or start the conversation with being a mentor or sponsor? It's also really important to know that you don't have to be in a leadership position, a leadership titled position to be a mentor or a sponsor. There's so many different subgroups and organize within an organization that you can mentor and sponsor people within. Are you a more proficient language speaker and you can mentor someone, or have you been in the position for a little bit longer than them? Or do you understand the dynamics of a certain team better than other people? Maybe you're having people come from a different department. That's a mentorship space. Or if you're on a project and you know that a colleague has the skills, even though you're not a manager or the director of an organization, you can still sponsor and say, hey, I know this person has these abilities. They can come over. They would be really a strong ad for this project. And so the mentorship sponsorship roles or being a mentee or a sponsee to be sponsored, you can really be at any level in any position because it's about the relationship that you're creating with other people. So as an organization, it's important to consider, does your organization have systems in place that connect high potential women with influential sponsors? And how can these be improved? And so, something to question here is, how do you identify what a high potential woman is, or a high potential individual in general? How do you classify high potential? And then, how can these systems be in place to say, this person's high potential, let's connect them with this person? So, what are you doing to make that very intentional? And as an organization, work that relationship so that it's not necessarily on the sponsor or on a mentee or a mentor. It's on the organization to intentionally create that. Because when you see people elevate through an organization, its success is not just for that individual, it's for the organization because you're building more effective, more capable, more skilled people in that space. And if you're a candidate or an employee who in your professional network could become a sponsor for your next career move, and what steps can you take to cultivate that relationship? First thing you need to do is understand what your career move is. What does your career trajectory look like? Where do you want to go? What do you want to explore? And then looking at how you can find people in that space and what you can do to build a relationship with them. What's really important is that you don't just message 100 people on LinkedIn and say, can you be my mentor? Can you be my mentor? Can you be my mentor? Because that's not an effective way of building a relationship. You want to understand what that person does, how they do it, and then consider the relationship because you may see them in a prestigious position and think, I want them to be my mentor. But then you may not like how they provide feedback or the type of feedback they have or the advice they give. And so you want someone that gels with that relationship, not just necessarily someone who's in a position that you want. They're very different. So to become a influential and leadership individual, it's important for you to build your confidence and your influence. And you can do this through three things: build your presence, network, and increase your visibility. The first one is your presence. So building your communication skills, becoming more confident and demonstrating what you have in here out there. So your strategic thinking. So whether that's developing the way that you communicate an elevator pitch for yourself. How do you sell yourself? What's the confidence in yourself? And that ties back to your self worth and your self efficacy and your confidence. And then how are you demonstrating what you're doing? We've talked previously about using numbers and to actual have tangible evidence of you being successful instead of just saying, I was a leader, I was successful. What does that mean? And how are you demonstrating it to people you're sharing? And then also draw attention to biases around presence and expectation. So, what does a confident individual face for women in the workplace? Bias around presence of women and how people present themselves and what they do and how they act. It's all very important to be aware of. And then how you respond to it is ultimately your decision. But we know that women face added barriers of if they interject or if they sit quietly and pretty and look pretty and whatever the decorum may be for a woman in the workplace. And so being aware of what that is and how that it can affect the way that you your presence comes across, but also then ultimately choosing how you engage to be most effective for you. The second piece is networking. So, creating spaces for meaningful networking that's intentional. Attending every networking event can be effective, but isn't as effective because it's not intentional. You may be meeting people that are never going to cross paths with you again, or you may meet someone who then could connect you to someone else. And so, it's more important for you to know why you're going to a networking, to know more about yourself, to know about your intentions and your path and your career plans, so that when you go spaces you can share that. And that goes back to the communication in your elevator pitch. Do you know how to sell yourself and to describe yourself and what you're doing and why you're doing it? Because if you're not going to have that in your back pocket, going into a networking space isn't going to be as effective for you. And then also looking at the broader perspectives and opportunity. Sometimes we go in with a very narrow perspective of what we plan to do when we comes to networking. I'm going to go meet this person and I'm going to ask them for a job. But there's alternatives that could be more effective and other doors could open. And so making sure that you have that broader understanding of that you're networking and you're still building skills just by networking. And then looking to connect on shared values, goals, and skills. Because when you're connecting with people based on that, you're opening yourself to that circle and to those spaces that align with your circle and your spaces. And the third one there is visibility, encouraging engagements and roles to highlight and celebrate women. So for yourself and for others, be a girl's girl, be a woman's woman. Encourage the representation of women and highlight women in your spaces just as much as you want people to highlight you. It's really important for us to do the same so that we're bringing people up along with us and creating opportunities and engaging in them. So, just as much as you want to connect with someone else, it's very important for us to welcome those people in. So if we want to say, hey, do you want to grab coffee or tea and have a conversation about your next steps? Or, hey, this is really important to me in the workplace. Could we have lunch? And the same thing with other people outside of your workplace in other opportunities. When we talk about building our confidence and our influence, it's about building our brand. We're building our representation of ourselves, we're building our understanding of ourselves, and then we're doing that for ourselves and others. We're creating this large circle of network where we're saying, this is who I am, this is what I want to do, who's with me? And then you bring people up alongside. So, how do you take action? For employers, there's a few questions I want you to ask because there's been a lot of conversations over the last four episodes about how your workplace has to change, how you can support women, what you can do. And so now, when we're looking at taking action, it's really like, here's 100,000 things to do. Where do I start? And so, the first question you can ask is, how can candidates or employees advocate for themselves without fear? Advocating means action. When people can advocate, they can draw attention to issues. And if they can draw attention to issues, those can be addressed and it can create a better space for people. What pipelines exist to bring women into circles? How are you intentionally including people? And what is the accountability behind that? And how is confidence being nurtured and built? What are you doing as an organization to support the development of an individual, giving them autonomy, giving them opportunity, and giving them responsibility? For employees and candidates, there's a lot of questions that you can ask yourself, but I think you should start with these ones. What are your personal goals? Because that is at the root of what you want to do, whether it's in your workplace or your community or for yourself. How can you seek mentorship and sponsorship opportunities? What ways are you building your visibility? Are you just kind of scrolling on socials or scrolling on networking platforms, but you're not engaging? Or you're not putting your name out there, or you're not introducing yourself to people, and then wondering, why is no one connecting with me? So, how are you building your visibility? And what resources can help me showcase myself? This is very important. How are you doing this? But what do you need to help you do this? Because the resources that help you showcase yourself is really broadening that opportunity for you. A lot of times when we question, why is this not happening for me? Why am I not being successful? Why am I not achieving my goals? We're missing that piece of your visibility and using resources to showcase ourselves. Because just as much as we need people to support us, we also need to advocate for ourselves. Two questions I want you to think about are, as we kind of shift out of this long series of learning, is how are you being intentional as an employer? And intentional is something that is a question that kind of goes everywhere. What are you doing to be purposeful? What is the purpose? What is the action? What is the intention? Because if you don't understand that, it's very hard to gauge whether you're being effective. And then as an individual, I want you to consider, how are you celebrating yourself? Because you have done so much to develop who you are, to gain skills, gain knowledge, and work to advocate for yourself and become who you are right now and where you're going. But how are you celebrating yourself? Because this is equally as important as developing yourself. So we're going to shift into the next piece where we're going to talk to my two experts, and we're going to ask them a couple questions where they're going to share their insights and expertise. We're going to start with Amanda, and Amanda's going to share her insights with us. And so Amanda is an HR business partner, and Amanda's going to help us understand a little bit more about how employers and employees and candidates can develop themselves. So, the first question, Amanda, that I have for you is, beyond recruitment, what retention strategies help maintain a robust pipeline for women leaders? And this question is so important because we talk about bringing people in and the labor market shortages and saying we need to hire, we need to hire, we need to hire. And we're also in a period of stepping stone careers where people just kind of do whatever is best for them. And there's all these different opportunities with remote work and hybrid work. And so people aren't staying loyal to, like, in career loyalty for their entire lives anymore. So retention strategies become very important, especially for women in the workplace. So I'm going to put it to you and ask you, what are we doing to maintain this pipeline of women leaders?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yes, my name is Amanda Furtado. I am a human resource business partner with 18 plus years experience across a diverse um, organizations. I've worked for manufacturing, I've worked in contact centers, information systems, logistics. I really, really love coaching and advising leaders and really driving organizational effectiveness. And so I was so excited to be part of this and participate with you today. And there's just there's just so much when it comes to retention of women leaders. It's so crucial for maintaining strong leadership pipelines. So I'm really excited to talk about some research that I did on how best to achieve this. It's beyond recruitment. Organizations must create inclusiveness, support environments, and that enable women to thrive. So I got 7 key strategies that I think are really important in moving forward in this space. Equitable career advancement opportunities is the first one. And I think that we can do it in 3 ways. We can be transparent with our promotion process. We want to ensure promotion criteria are clear, measurable, and apply consistently. We also want leadership development programs. So, this is important, where we're offering targeted programs that prepare women for executive roles. And we want to include stretch assignments where we are proactively assisting women and assigning women to high impactful projects that enhance their leadership visibility. And that one's a really good one, getting them out in front, letting them be seen, and really letting them showcase what makes them fantastic. The second one is to have competitive and transparent compensation. So that just starts with regular pay equity audits, where we are conducting annual surveys and reviews to identify and then correct gender pay gaps. And that second part's important. We're very good at identifying, but sometimes we're slow at correcting. So we need to make sure we're doing that part. We want to have salary transparency where we're publicly sharing salary ranges, and this will help eliminate discrepancies. And one that's not really talked about, but I think is important, is providing negotiation support. This could include providing negotiating training to equip women with skills to advocate for fair pay. There is a lot of research out there that shows men are more likely to negotiate for higher wages than women, and this can contribute to our gender pay gaps. So supporting women in this space is also important. The third one is strategy. The third strategy is to have flexible and inclusive work policies. One of the easiest way to support this is with hybrid, flex, and remote work options. So have policies supporting flexible work arrangements to accommodate a diverse group of needs. Have parental leave and caregiver support, offering both robust parental leave policies and elder support care can really help with people who need to have that extra time off or need that flexibility to accommodate their lives outside of work. Um, and it's something that not a lot of employers have gotten into yet, but are working towards. We also want to have performance based evaluations. We really should be shifting away from presenteeism and evaluate employees based on outcome. On a side, this can actually reduce your sick time, and as illnesses are less likely to spread when staff feel safe staying home when they're ill. The fourth key strategy is having a strong mentorship program and sponsorship programs, something that was spoken about earlier. Having executive sponsorships, ensuring leaders are actively advocating for high potential women, having cross gender mentorships, encouraging mentorships from both male and female leaders, and having peer networks in your organization and finding peer networks even outside of your organization that establish women leadership groups for support and knowledge sharing. And this is something that one department doesn't have to tackle alone. This is not necessarily has to be your HR department that wants to take this on and champion something like this. Also, we want to make sure that we have inclusive and bias free workplace culture. This is the fifth, and I think it's really important in retaining women leaders. We need to make sure that we are addressing microaggressiveness, and we need to train leaders to recognize and stop workplace bias. I think it's important that I note that we might actually have somebody on this call who has great training programs in this space and can support all of us. We also want to recognize and make sure we're showing our leaders with visibility. We need to actively highlight women's contributions and achievements in our organization. And we want to make sure that we have inclusive leadership training where we are educating managers on fostering diverse leadership styles. And all of this will not happen overnight. It might be a change in culture in your organization, but it is really important. Um, the sixth key strategy is having a well-being and mental health support program in place. Your comprehensive benefits package should offer mental health support tailored to working women's challenges. Work life balance initiatives should also be important to the organization, where we're encouraging a culture where taking time off for personal well being is normalized and not scrutinized. And we can also look to support burnout prevention. We can do this by monitoring workloads and providing resources to prevent burnout, which is really great for everybody in your organization. The last key strategy is having clear succession planning and retention tracking. We really need to make sure that we're having diverse metrics where we're tracking retention and advancement rates of women leaders. We want to make sure that we have that succession pipeline that was spoken about earlier, ensuring women are well representative in leadership succession plans and well supported. And we also want to make sure that we are doing exit interviews where we can analyze why women leave and look to not only find those issues, but address those systematic issues. And again, that's another stopping point. We often do the exit interviews, but we don't do that next step. And we need to make sure we're doing that next step in addressing those issues. The role of leaders in retaining women really comes down to normalizing diverse leadership styles. We want to make sure we're challenging outdated norms of leadership. We want to make sure we're holding our leaders accountable. We're tying DEI efforts to performance reviews, and we want to ensure male allyship, where we're making gender equality not just our responsibility as women's, but everybody's responsibility. Thanks.
So, Amanda, as you were talking, all I could think about was like I was creating this map in my head of all of the different pathways, and everything came back to if you want to keep women, talk to women. And that
Absolutely.
really is it. And I feel like a lot of organizations, we do the initial interview, we onboard people, we kind of say, this is where you're going, this is the culture, and then we leave it until they leave. Then all of a sudden, we started to do exit interviews and we said, we want to know why people are leaving. But then we never really did anything about it. We just have this kind of pile of information that people
Hmm.
are leaving because they didn't like their workload or they didn't like the flex hour or that they didn't get flex hours. So we know there's issues. Now I think there needs to be kind of a shift and say, how do we talk to people intermittently and not just through like a here's a survey. It's let's understand what you need as an individual and how we can support you and what opportunities we can create for you and to want people to succeed. And I've heard this countless times where it says you want to create people that can leave, but a culture that people don't want to leave.
Exactly.
So I appreciate you sharing some of those strategies that that employers can do to retain women. And the important thing for people to hear in this as well is as an individual within an organization, if your employer is not doing this, you need to advocate for it. If you're not given the opportunity to give feedback, how are you asking to give feedback? Because it's just as important as the opportunity as the employer to do this as well. So the next question I want to ask you is geared towards employees and candidates. And this question, I was so excited when I saw that you picked it because I'm excited to hear about how we talk about leadership styles and leadership styles that are kind of shifting and changing because we never really give people the opportunity to develop as leaders when they're not in title leadership positions. So the question I'd like you to answer is how can women stay true to their leadership style while adapting to environments that may not yet value diverse leadership approaches?
Thank you. I picked this one because I thought about it and I thought how challenging this one could be. Um, and so I really had to do a lot of work on in this space to really learn about what we can do. Women leaders are often faced with challenges of balancing authenticity with the need to adapt to workplace environments that may still prioritize traditional and often male centric leadership models. So, while corporations in Canada have made progress towards diversity and inclusion, women still encounter biases that pressure them to conform to outdated leadership norms. And successfully navigating this leadership, or excuse me, this landscape requires a combination of self-awareness, strategic adaptability, excuse me, and influence building. So I challenged myself here, as I said, to come up with defined approaches in this complicated change, and to come up with what I think are the five best key approaches to help navigate traditional environments when we're in the workplace. The first one, and what I thought was the most important one here, was defining your leadership identity. So, before adapting to external expectations, it's crucial to have a strong understanding of your own leadership identity. And to do this, we really need to clarify your strengths and leadership styles. And you can do this by identifying your core leadership attributes. Maybe it's collaboration, strategic empathy, results driven, whatever they are, identify those attributes. You also need to assess what makes you effective. Do you lead by influence, by coaching, or decisiveness? What makes you effective? And you want to own your leadership style without feeling pressured to mirror dominant or other approaches that don't fit who you are. And that takes practice. Sometimes we can find ourselves sliding into that space of really feeling that pressure, and we need to just pull ourselves back out of there when we get there. We also want to make sure we align leadership with core values. So determine your non negotiables. What aspects of your leadership must remain intact for you to feel authentic? And hold true to that for yourself. Recognize that adapting does not mean losing yourself, but rather find ways to thrive with a given environment. So sometimes we are going to have to adapt to certain situations, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And also, you need to define success on your terms. So shift the mindset from fitting in to shaping the culture. Recognize that authentic leadership is an asset and not a limitation, and really stand true to you. The second approach is to adapt without compromising your authenticate you and who you are. Organizations may not always be ready for diverse leadership approaches, but women can be strategic at making impact while staying still true to themselves. Sometimes we have to have situational flexibility, but we don't need to change who we are. We can adjust our communication and leadership approach based on a situation. So, for examples, we can adjust communication styles to fit our audience. If directness is undervalued, frame assertive messages with diplomacy. Use storytelling to be persuasive. Data-driven storytelling helps introduce new perspectives in a relatable way. And demonstrate business impact by connecting inclusive leadership approaches with measurable outcomes. So, example, improving team engagement, retention, and productivity are all great ways to demonstrate your business impact. We can also be strategic in framing. Reframe leadership traits that may be perceived as soft into business advantages. So we can reframe collaboration by positioning it as cross-functional effectiveness. We can reframe empathy as emotional intelligence, which is a key trait to effective leadership. And we can reframe inclusivity by connecting it to innovation and diverse problem solving. By positioning your traits as strengths, we as women leaders can influence the workplace without compromising our authenticity. We also want to build influence and challenge bias thoughtfulness. We know systematic barriers exist. However, we can take strategic steps to gain influence and shift workplace dynamics. Some ways we can do this is by finding allies and cultivating strong networks. So, identifying sponsors and mentors, as was talked about earlier, both male and female, who can advocate for your leadership approach. By building peer networks of like minded leaders who reinforce that inclusive practice, and also by encouraging external professional networks and joining them. So, women in capital markets, women's executive networks, all can really help you in cultivating your strong networks. Another thing we need to do is to challenge bias without being dismissed. Women often face that double standard as seen as too soft if collaborative, but too aggressive if assertive. And a couple ways that you can kind of counter this is to address bias with curiosity rather than confrontation. You could say something like, I've noticed women are given feedback on their tone more than men. Have you observed this too? Or we can use data to challenge assumptions. So, for example, we can say studies show that inclusive leadership leads to 17% higher in team performance. Let's explore how that applies to our strategy. And we can always engage in male allies who can reinforce the message and model inclusive leadership with us. The fourth one is strengthening executive presence without losing your authenticity. Effective executive presence is often associated with confidence, decisiveness, and authority. We need to develop this presence while still remaining true to our leadership style, whatever that is. You own your achievements and you need to self advocate. Speak confidently about your contributions. Self promotion should feel like storytelling, not arrogance. Use I statements to claim ownership of results. I led the initiative that improved retention by 20%. Women have a habit of using we statements much more often than men do. I know I'm really bad at doing that. We need to communicate with authority. So we need to avoid using minimizing language, words like I think, just, sorry to bother you. And I'm definitely still working on this. And now you'll hear everyone through the presentation, but try to remove the word like or when you're speaking. Speak clear, direct statements are important while maintaining warmth. And be mindful of your body language. Maintain eye contact. Use open posture and project your confidence. This might not come naturally to you, so practice. Practice in a mirror, practice with people you trust to really build your confidence in this space. We're always a work in progress. And one other thing that you can do to strengthen your executive presence is to command the room in your own way. Authenticity is a leadership strength, whether you're an introvert, an extrovert, or somewhere in between. Rather than forcing a dominant leadership style, find ways to amplify your presence. It could be through leading through influence, strategic questioning, or even relationship building. My fifth and last is to lead by example and pave the way for others. As more women advance into leadership, organizations are going to be forced to evolve. By succeeding with staying authentic, women create new leadership norms for ourselves and for the next generations coming in. We can normalize diverse leadership styles by advocating for leadership programs that highlight different ways to lead, and by using your own success to challenge traditional leadership models. We can mentor and sponsor future women leaders, as talked about earlier, actively mentoring emerging female leaders and encouraging them to embrace their own strengths, and sponsor high potential women by advocating for their inclusion in high impact projects. Let's make them seen. And finally, push for systematic change. Advocate for inclusive policies like pay equity, flexible work, and sponsorship programs. And work with HR and your leadership to ensure performance evaluations are free from gender bias. My final thoughts here is there was a lot to cover. Women leaders in Canada do not need to choose between authenticity and influence. We can have both. By understanding our leadership strengths, are strategically adapting without compromising our values and building influence, we can create meaningful change within our organization. As corporate Canada continues to evolve, the presence of authentic women leaders like ourselves will help redefine leadership norms for future generations.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you for it was like a pep talk. I was like feeling like, yes, I could do this. Here's my plan. These are the steps I'm going to take. And so I appreciate you giving us those actionable steps that we can now take into our spaces and consider, how am I doing this? Is it effective? Can I improve on this? And one thing that you had talked about when we were specifically addressing leadership styles is you took these very rigid things, which leadership styles are like, here's a quiz to tell you what type of leader you are. And you made it very broad, because being a leader is about understanding others and understanding yourself. And if you can understand yourself and you can see how you relate in a situation and with various people, you can adjust and shift. And whether that's your communication style, and if you're going to change your presence or how you follow up or whatever it may be,
Mhm.
you showed how you're developing your true self authentically and then bringing that into spaces, not so that you're crossing your own boundaries or changing who you are, but to adapt. And I think adaptability is something that is overlooked. We talk a lot about resilience, but we don't look at adaptability, and they're very different.
Mhm.
And when we look at adaptability as a leader, it's about having the skills to keep pushing forward. And so thank you so much for that.
Thank you. There is a lot to cover. Each one of my areas I could have dove into as its own separate question. It was really high level, but it gives us now where we can take some of these away and dive into them ourselves a little bit more.
I appreciate that. And your contact information will be connected with the webinar as well. So people have the opportunity to reach out and kind of dig more into your expertise and pull you in as that HR business partner that you are.
I love that. And yes, absolutely. Please feel free to reach out to me on anything that I've spoken about today.
Thank you. So we're going to shift and we're going to now welcome Saleha Khan. Thank you, Saleha, for joining me. Saleha and I have engaged in every space under the sun. And so I'm very grateful. I would like to say that during my development as a consultant and as a HR adjacent professional and as a DEI leader, Saleha's kind of been that mentor and sponsor to me, leading me in this space, showing me what works, what doesn't, how to navigate different things. And so to now have the opportunity to hear some more of your insights, I'm very grateful. The first question I'm going to ask you today is, how can organizations incorporate an intersectional lens when developing leadership programs to ensure women of diverse backgrounds are supported? And this is a big one. So thank you for taking on all of the intersectionality.
First of all, thank you so much, Janelle. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege. I'm trying to remember when we first met, because there was something clearly. It was, we all tend. This network always evolves. This network of women sponsoring and connecting and networking and basically creating this large sisterhood across generations, across ethno-racial, cultural chasms and everything. But it really does come down to, when we see each other, we recognize the passion for justice. We recognize that we are actually in it because we want to do the right thing. So thank you so much, Janelle, for being in that room with me at that time. I know the questions that I'd chosen for, and I'm sort of I was hoping you'd start with sponsorship, but you know what? Intersectionality is actually the reason why sponsorship would even exist in the first place. So I think I'm going to based on so many leaders that I've worked with over 20 plus years. I started very young. I have to say that, okay? Like, ageism is totally creeping up on us. So I think the first thing I would say is let us start with defining what intersectionality is and actually means. For many of the organizations, and specifically in organizational leadership, the understanding of the word itself is quite ominously described. We tend to rely very, very quickly on Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw's example, or her definition in her research, and why she came up with, and it was that somehow it is very much specific to socioeconomic status. It's very much specific to the experience of Black single mothers. It's the experience. Well, it doesn't really like apply on us. Like, look at us in the room. We look around our table, we are, it's oval, so it's, kind of close to King Arthur's. And here we are. We've got everybody in the room. We have this, we have this one Black woman. We have probably have this one, person who identifies as being part of the LGBTQ2S community, hopefully openly, and we have another woman. So I think we have met the requirements of completing what the intersectional lens really requires for us to have in our leadership gang. That's not it. Intersectionality goes way beyond. And specifically when we start exploring what it means for us on a very specific internally for our organizational capacity building, I would say, and my suggestion would be, not only do you define intersectionality for yourself on that organizational leadership basis, but also understand and create a visual mapping for the organizational leadership. I think that is one trick of the trade that I can share and say that really helps put things in front of us. We make it visual. We openly talk about the identities, and not just identities, but the requirements for what that individual is going to need. What is also lacking around that table for us? We continue to say, bring your whole self. That's honestly, that's a bit of a comical and a farcical situation. If I was to bring my whole self to work, I know I wouldn't be allowed in it. So knowing myself, knowing who I am. So I'm just going to say that so many of us in leadership positions or in quasi-leadership positions, and I'm thinking of middle managers, when we have finally made it to that coveted title of being a manager or being a supervisor, or being a team lead, we finally see ourselves where we are very much in a precarious position, because if we don't fit in with the culture of the organization, we will lose that step that we have finally arrived at. And that's where that whole idea of how intersectionality is being viewed by the leadership is very, very essential. It's not a check in the box. It cannot be just, oh, we got one of this and one of this and one of this, and then off we go. That is definitely not an intersectional approach. Or in some cases, I've had this where basically we get one person in leadership, but based on that one person's multiple identities, we have practically checked all the boxes or most of the boxes around the intersectional lens, identified that individual, made them the show horse for the entire organization. And by show horse, I mean, and forgive me for using that term, because that's exactly how an individual feels at the end of it. It goes beyond tokenism, because then that person is trotted out. Their faces plastered on their recruitment flyers or whatever, and say, here, we've got this one person, and look, we are welcoming to that one individual, completely forgetting that intersectional lens means that it is going to be very much individually based on each person's experiences. So even when I talked, okay, so how do I identify myself? I'm a woman. I hope that's clear. I'm a Muslim woman. I'm a Canadian. I wasn't born here. I moved here 25 years ago now. But I am raising first generation Canadians as well. So these are just some elements of my intersectionalities of my multiple identities that I have. And those are where my requirements are going to be, whether it's flex time, whether it is understanding what cultural calendar I will be, celebrating. And those are just some of the very much above the mark, above the iceberg kind of scenarios. The multiple languages that I speak. How many people actually even know about that, right? Where did I grow up? What cultures do I have in front of me? And what cultural understanding I have for other verses, the multiverses that I have lived in over my lifetime. So that is always below the surface because I'm not necessarily going to be sharing that with anyone at the drop of a hat. But these are all requirements of understanding what that intersectional lens is going to look like for the leadership. So, as I said, understanding and creating that visual mapping, I think, is going to be very, very useful. Creating buy-in is going to be, again, a very important thing. When we started talking about how do you create an understanding, it's not just defining intersectionality in a policy statement. That's, whoa, wonderful. Every one of us does that. That doesn't mean that we are actually understanding or applying it in an effective way or efficient way. And so when I talk about efficiency, two things that pop in my mind is, of course, the process itself is very much based on the change management system approach, right? You are talking about communication. Janelle, you talked about it. You said this is in a nutshell. You just kind of put it in a tiny little thing to say everything about women, everything about leaders, everything about middle management, everything about men as well. We cannot have that without having that open communication, and open communication at the speed of trust, right? That is what we really need. And I'm using that not because I necessarily believe in the work or the book, or I'm definitely saying that, okay, go out and get it. But when I say the speed of trust, because that in itself is, as we start trusting the people around us, our communication becomes stronger. It becomes honest. It becomes authentic. It becomes brave. And that brave communication is essential to have, where I feel not just safe, but I know that I can say what is in my mind. I can say what is in my heart. I can say what works for my soul. And then I can put it in front, knowing that people are not going to throw it back in my face at the first chance they get. They're not going to use it to demote me. They're not going to use it to tokenize me. They're not going to use it to basically, say, oh my gosh, this person is definitely not a good fit. And maybe, the 3 months that we've had with this individual are more than enough because we don't see that it's really going to work well for us after this. So let's just let them go, right? So these are all the kind of authentic, real communications that would be really required to have. And that's why I'm saying that trust is so important to have in there. So communication that requires to be constant, that is immersive in system policies and practices, which means that we make communication brave and safe communication, talking, and then hearing, and then listening to implement, right? Not just listening because we've got an employee resource group. Oh, well, we have employee resource groups. We support internal support networks. Well, that's fantastic. What are you doing with that? They may then just turn into a nice social setting for people to come together and be celebrated, and we fly the flags and we get the buttons, and we celebrate this one person or celebrate the entire community, which is fantastic. It's absolutely required, but keeping in mind that it's not something we do once a year. Black History Month. Oh my goodness, once a year. The Indigenous Day, the National Day for Reconciliation. Oh yeah, September 30th is coming up. Everybody put on an orange shirt. That is not what is really required. What is required is, what is it that we are doing to communicate all across the year so that we can understand why that is important? So many of the individuals, and I'm just going to take a very quick example of some of the experiences I've had over the years. So many Indigenous people don't talk about their indigeneity because they're afraid to openly talk about it within that organizational setting, not because they're ashamed of it, not because they need to hide it. They're very, very proud individuals. And please understand, I'm not speaking on behalf of, I'm only observing on what I have seen. But what ends up happening is people are tired of explaining themselves on and on and on again. And that's where I'm coming to do my job. Let me do my job. And I'm just going to do my job, keep my head down, keep myself to myself, and walk away. And yeah, of course, I get all these letters, I get all these emails, I got all these pats on the backs to say, whoa, whoa, we've got an ISN, go join it. Why would I join it? Why would I identify that I am actually part of that group where I see what the people are culturally speaking about myself and culturally speaking about everybody else who they think is Indigenous? Why would I put myself out there? Right. So that is really, really important to keep in mind is when we're talking about communication. I know Amanda talked about policies and systems and strategies. Accountability is huge, right? So these are all very, very important. So when I talk about immersive in systems, policies, and practices, it means that there is an intentional and accountable, and yes, a firm approach towards that process of what we're going to have put in place to support the intersectional identities of the people who are working with us. And recognizing that minoritized groups, that marginalized groups, and I do use the term minoritized, historically oppressed groups, the individuals who are misunderstood on so many measures and levels. We need to give them the time, we need to give them the space, and we need to give them the support that is required, that is going to allow them, that is going to give them, not, I shouldn't say allow them, but that is going to give the control back in their hands so that they can say what it is that they need to have for themselves. So that's the intersectional lens, question. I hope that that has been helpful a little bit. I'm looking forward to questions that will be coming in the chat, and I think we'll be able to go with that.
Yeah, I like the way that you framed it at the end when you talk about intentional and accountable, because that's something that kind of was the message through today was when we do a lot of this work, we aren't intentional about it, or we don't really understand what we're doing. We're just doing it to do it. And so the programs that we initiate aren't necessarily sustainable or effective. And so, especially when creating leadership programs or creating opportunities for women of diverse backgrounds to become leaders, it's very important to look at what that intersectionality means and how you're keeping that front of mind. Because sometimes when we talk about diversity, and especially now because there's a polarized climate around diversity, is saying it and using the terms and the words that have become so taboo to talk about, where you are fearful to say that because I'm a Muslim woman, this is what I need, or because I'm a woman, this is what I need, or a parent, or whatever it may be. And we don't have those conversations as much. And it's because that trust isn't there, because that psychological safety isn't there. And so organizations need to take 10 steps back and look at that very foundation of how they're creating safe spaces and then what they're doing to then build on top of it. Saleha, I know you've got so much to say, and you're going to see that I skipped 2 of your questions in 3 seconds, because I'm going to shift you to this question, which I want to hear so badly. And I know you have so much insight about it. So talking about employees, and candidates, what practical steps can women take to overcome imposter syndrome? And I use that word very intentionally because I know we love to hate it, and build authentic confidence, because maybe people don't know what imposter syndrome is, or maybe they don't know how to overcome this made up thing. And so I'm excited to hear how you tell them to do this.
So the first thing is I am actually going to request everybody on the line, and anybody who happens to hear this conversation, whenever they get to do that, understand what imposter syndrome, what that phrase means before accepting the definition for yourself. Recognizing that this particular phrase was formulated not too long ago. It was speaking to the experience specifically of white women in leadership positions. Recognizing also that that experience is time limited. So whatever research was done upon which this phrase, imposter syndrome, was created or defined, that in itself is also a very limited time frame in the entire spectrum of time of women who have been in positions of leadership. Recognizing that women have been leaders since the time of Eve. Eve was a leader. And so women continuously have been in positions of leadership. And by that, I mean like amazing positions of leadership where they not only influenced one person or one organization or one entity, they influenced the direction of nations. And we know that. So for us to just, because it's a buzzword that is around, that I'm going to, because I've heard a few people use it, and because Obama said it, or oh my gosh, Oprah Winfrey said it, or someone else used it, that I'm just gonna slap it on my forehead and say, oh yeah, this also applies to me. And I'll tell you something, for racialized women, for Black women, for Indigenous women, for women who are mothers, parents, aunties, caregivers, for women who have disabilities, who are identify as being neurodiverse, for example, or are happen to be visually impaired, going through menopause. That's not a disability, but hey, pretty close to it sometimes. That's how it feels for me. So there are so many experiences of womanhood, being a woman, that we seem to forget that women have to work 3 times more, at least, if not 5 times, based on the intersectional layers of who they are, how they identify, to the point that it's like, the Superman is nothing in front of these women. So they do move mountains. They do create and carve pathways for themselves and pathways for the women that are coming in behind them. So for me to say that imposter syndrome, I'm not an imposter. I am me. This is who I am. This is myself. And I think women really need to start recognizing that a lot of times, and I'm talking about leadership, with whether it's formal, whether it's informal, which is community. You're a leader within your own home space. You're a leader within your community. You're a leader within your own workspace. You're a leader within your academic space as a student. Recognize that nonstop, because some of these phrases are used and utilized effectively to shut our voices, to let us know that we are weaker, to let us know that we are not as strong enough, that somehow we have come to this space out of grace that was given to us for some reason. That is not the case, sister. That is not the case at all. We take our space. In fact, we fight to take our space. In some cases, we have had to snatch and go through walls and go around walls in many, many cases, go around barriers continuously, just so that we can finally take a little bit of the space that should have been ours from the get-go. So Imposter syndrome, very nice to read about. I'm going to strongly suggest that yes, you do read it, you think about it, and think about it from the context of not just applying it because it's a cute little buzzword, but really saying, does it really truly apply on me? I am on LinkedIn and I find some people, speaking about this thing. Ruchika, oh gosh, I'm going to share the name and I'll share the article as soon as I can. So you can definitely drop it as part of resource. And my goodness, if I can repost that thing multiple times because it is so true. And that's where I'm coming from. Women of color do not and cannot have imposter syndrome because they are working 3 to 5 times as hard to get the job done, to be allowed to get the same job done that they were hired to do. Hear what I'm saying? We were hired to do a certain job, yet we have to fight to be allowed to get it done. And that is not an imposter syndrome. That's you being a warrior. So maybe we can turn it around and call it a warrior syndrome for us. Hey, we just coined a new one. There you go. So sorry for all the noise in my back, in the background here, but yeah, there's just recognizing it again. There is enough evidence when they talk about specifically. I'm going to focus very, very quickly around women in general, but racialized women specifically, Black women, Indigenous women. We're talking about highly, very, very strongly, academically rich experiences that are being brought on. You have so many PhDs in the room, you have so many masters in the room, you have so many certificates in the room, and then you will have a man. And it's amazing how this term imposter syndrome is actually being used to oppress women. This is what my personal take is on it, is how this particular framework is now actually used to silence women more than anything else, to confuse us, to create this understanding that no matter what we have done, no matter where we have finally landed in and around the table, in whichever seat finally we're sitting, maybe we shouldn't be sitting in it. Right? So I'm going to say this again to everyone. Understand what it is. Understand what this quote unquote imposter syndrome is. Recognize it for what it is. It's a bit of research that was done in a very strictly specified framework. And that is what it was. Does it really truly apply on me? Perhaps a question around self-discovery. And that is, of course, something that you will have to do for yourself.
Thank you, Saleha. And I think that the important thing that we kind of talked about is these terms that come up and we apply them to ourselves, or they're applied to us through social media or through popular sharing of self-development. And I've seen so many courses actually pop up that say, get over imposter syndrome by paying for this like 2-day course. And I've always like taken a step back and thought, imposter syndrome is victim blaming. It's you don't feel like you belong. No, the environment doesn't create a space where you should belong. And so whether the term has been applied to you or you applied it to yourself, just take a step back and think, is this the space that I want to be in? Is this space recognizing me, validating me, honoring me, celebrating me? And why do I feel like I don't belong here? Because I have higher standards than this place. And that's where that imposter syndrome comes from. And it's just blaming the individual to say you feel inadequate because you are inadequate, when really you feel inadequate because we're making you feel that way. And so
Absolutely.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And that's why I said, does it really truly apply in yourself? A little path of self-discovery right there. And trust me, once you've gone, you don't, it's not a rabbit hole. You're just going to see it. You're going to evidence yourself on it. And you're going to say, holy crap, obviously this just does not apply on me. And you're right. It is a way to oppress women further. So Yeah, let's find out what it is that we can do with that.
So thank you, Saleha. I really appreciate the insight that you've given. And I want to take a moment to say thank you to all of the women who've been a part of this series. It's been an incredible opportunity for me to engage with the women that I have the privilege of being in my space all the time and networking with. Our episode 1, Dr. Amber Godwin, Dr. Kelsey Evans Amalu, if you haven't checked that out. Episode 2, Rita Johanna and Keisha Martineau. Episode 3 was Christine Bandy and Kathy Monchamp. And this last episode with Amanda Furtado and Saleha Khan. Thank you so much for taking the time to increase the knowledge and skills and empower women this Women's History Month, and taking this even further and making this a part of your everyday. I want to say thank you again to the Job Shop, and thanks to West for being partners in this project and giving us the opportunity to share this education outward, because we have to do this as a collective and team together.